Welcome, dear students and learners, to the concept of reader response criticism. Before we attempt to do a historical survey of the theory, or before we try to deal with the prominent theorists and what they had to say about it, we shall first try to clear the concept or the points that reader response criticism deals with. So, before we go into the theory of reader response criticism, I would like to contextualize it and try to create a basic framework from which to approach this topic. Now, before I begin, I'm reminded of a song from the movie Sound of Music, a song sung by Julia Roberts, which says, "Let's start at the very beginning, a very good place to start." Having said that, we also know the students of literature who have, through the reading of Andrew Bennett and Nicholas Ryles, an introduction to literature, criticism and theory, in his first chapter called The Beginnings, he problematizes the concept of beginning. What he brings to our understanding is that there are a lot of pre-readings or pre-beginnings which exist before the beginning. So there are notions, theories, ideas, experiences, knowledges, which either the author is deriving from or which the reader takes to the text while interpreting the text. Having said that, our current work will also have the problems of beginnings, but it would at least do us good to make a point from where to approach this topic, right? So now I would like to refer to a concept which we earlier read and we understood, which is the reader response criticism. We all know that during the first half of the 20th century, the movement of a formalistic approach to literature or reader response criticism was very prominent. What were the basic points that they were trying to communicate? What was the basic idea that they brought in their criticism? So out of the many ideas, we will pick ones which are relevant to us. One of the first things that should come to our mind is the concept of affective fallacy. According to the new critical theorists, affective fallacy was to be avoided. The second question is, what is an affective fallacy? So affective fallacy is the effect the text that the text has on the reader in interpreting the text, meaning thereby the critic or the reader would be responding to the text depending upon the effect or the impact, whether it is social, psychological, emotional, personal, whatever the impact that it has had on the reader. And according to the new critics, this would color the reading of the text, meaning thereby that it would become a subjective response to a text. So what they were attempting to do is to have an objective understanding of the text in front of them. What they were also trying to do is to have a scientific approach to the study of the given text, meaning thereby that the understanding or the analysis of the text should come from within the text through the written words or through the signs or through the clues which were inherent within the written text. Now, what this also entails is that apart from the fact that it pushes the reader to the background, it brings the text to the foreground, meaning thereby that the text in itself exists full of meaning inherent in it, which means it is an objective reality, which is the source or the fountainhead of meaning, and anybody who went to it would be able to derive meaning out of it as it would communicate to the reader. Now, having said that, what does reader response criticism do or have to say in context with the background which I just laid down for you. The reader response criticism in that sense is diametrically opposite to the new critical theory. Though there are similarities, but I'm not dealing with it right now. We will come to it later. So what does reader response criticism do, or what is their approach? What do they think? Now what they do is they foreground the reader. The question is, why should they do that, or what is their argument supporting foregrounding the reader? Now, while they are foregrounding the reader, there is a basic reason, or there is an inherent logic which they use while foregrounding the reader. So what they explain is, I'm not going to name the theories and the theorists right now, that I shall reserve for a later lecture, but I'm just explaining the concept to you right now. So what they believe is that a reader who picks the text to read is not a passive or inactive entity which is just going to the text to derive something out of it. The reader, there might be varieties of readers. There might be informed readers, there might be uninformed readers, there might be readers with strong reading background, academic background, knowledge background. That apart, every reader, from whatever background they come with their own mindset to engage with the text. So the reader could have a particular socio-historical political experience. The reader might come from a certain emotional place. The reader might come from a certain intellectual space, and while they engage with meaning making of the text, those things start interacting with the text. Those things starts impinging upon the text. Those things start adding meaning to the written words of the text. In itself, the text does not have a meaning unless the reader is comprehending it. So the point that I'm trying to make is, the process of comprehension is an active process which comes from the point of view of the reader. So every reader takes a different, engages in the act of reading individually, separately, bringing in nuances, bringing in understandings which might have been overlooked by the other reader, or which might have been read differently by another reader. So what we understand is that the meaning of the text does not exist on its own within the text. So what happens is, when you are trying to effectively derive meaning out of it, or when the reader is trying to effectively derive meaning out of it, the reader is engaging actively with the text, giving meaning to the written words. So what we see now is that the reader becomes the more empowered in the whole scheme of meaning making of the text. So if the reader has not read, or if the reader does not read, or if the reader does not comprehend, the text in itself conveys nothing to the reader or to those who have not read. Therefore, what the reader respond theorists do is, they bring in the importance or the value of the reader, which for the longest time had not been done, and which, like I told you before, was a concept diametrically opposite to the concept which was propagated by the new critics. Now, the next point of worry would be, if there are n number of readers and if there are n number of meanings being derived from the text, then what is the actual meaning, or is there at all a meaning, or is there just no meaning? It is just an arbitrary meaning making process that is taking place. Now, what we have to understand is that when a text is written, it is definitely written by the author, and whether the author's role is foregrounded or is in the background, the author definitely exists. The author is using tools, rhetorics, devices with which he is writing his or her story, and by doing so is making a basic framework or is making some sort of a guiding principle through which to approach the text. So while the author is doing his or her job or has done his or her job, then the reader takes over from there. Even one has to understand that when the author is writing, he or she is selective in the process of what to include, what to exclude. Whether it is a conscious activity or whether it is an unconscious activity, the process of inclusion, exclusion is something which constantly exists while writing a text. Now, while the author writes from his or her, from their own perspective, when it reaches the reader guides to make meaning out of the text within the given principles that already exist within the text. So what I'm trying to explain is that rather than having a total misreading or multiple irrelevant readings of the text, there are within a given framework various responses, various meanings that can be derived out of a text. So what I'm trying to say is that within a logical framework, one can make a variety of meanings, create a variety of meanings out of the text, which is separate from or which is distinguished from a misreading of the text. We are not considering misreading. Misreading is something which is beyond the scope of the text. We are trying to understand the concept of the variety of reading within the scope of a given text. With this, we move on to another concept. So if the author has already set parameters for the reader to read and guide the reader through a certain reading experience, then how come within that scope, there is a chance to make a variety of meanings. Like I said before, every reader comes from a different experiential background, different intellectual background, different emotional backgrounds, different economic backgrounds, and those I told you before would impinge on the reading of the text too. But now, like I also informed you that while the author is creating a text, the author is in a process of selection and rejection. And while doing so, there are gaps which come within the existence of the text. So as much as a text is a creation of an idea, there are certain gaps, there are certain spaces which exist within the text. Now, where do these spaces exist? Are they like physical spaces or what are they? They are spaces within the ideas that the author is trying to communicate. They are spaces within the structure of the text, moving from one word to the other, one line to the other, one sentence to the other, one stanza to the other, one paragraph to the other. Say, for example, if we take one of the texts which we have very often dealt with while doing critical theories and criticisms, that is To His Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. What do we see? That they are divided into various stanzas, and each stanza comes with a holistic idea on its own, a unique idea on its own. Of course, there is a central idea which joins all of them together, but while the reader is reading, it moves from a stanza to another, from one idea to the other. After having read one idea, then moves on to the other, which means while moving from one idea to the other, there is obviously a gap which starts which naturally starts existing within the text. Now, so similarly, what the reader does therefore is, in the process of meaning making, is actively trying to fill up the gaps to have a total comprehension of what has been written. So while the reading process is on, there is also a process of not only understanding what is written, but also attributing meaning to it from the reader's perspective, from where the reader is making an active effort to put meaning into it and to understand it as a comprehensive whole. Now, having said that, what we see right now is that the reader has sufficiently been empowered to become one of the centers of meaning of an existing text. Now, why are we suddenly talking of the reader, or where does this concept of a reader come from? Again, in the same book by Andrew Bennett and Nicholas Royal, what we understood was, so as students of English literature, having read M.H. Abrams' The Mirror and the Lamp, we understand, as very beautifully explained by Abrams, that literary theories can be classified into 4 components, right? And of course, we all understand, I'm presuming, that what is the role of a literary theory, or what does literary theory have to do with literature? Just the mere writing of literature does not really give it any significance unless it is read, interpreted, understood, and analyzed, right? So the literary theory entails all these various acts and activities. So what are the literary theories, or what are the ways that all literary theories, what are the categories in which all literary theories can be classified? One is looking at the work itself, which is something which I already referred to, where the reader response, not the reader response criticism, but the new critical approach does. It takes the work as the be-all and end-all of the work, be-all and end-all of the literary theory, or of the way of approaching literature. Now, apart from the work, there are other aspects or other angles through which literary theory can be approached. One could be from the point of view of the artist, that is the author, the writer, the poet, or so on and so forth, where the artist is foregrounded. And this also we tried to understand while I was explaining in the course of my explanation till now. There is another aspect, that is the aspect of the universe, that is the socio-historical political background, or the historical biographical approach through which we try to understand the literary text. And finally, there is the component of the audience or the reader, which also impinges upon the meaning making of the text. So here what we see, while we concentrate on the reader response theory, it does not mean that the other theories are nullified. They also have their own importance and their reasons for existence. But what the reader response theory does is very responsibly tries to foreground the relevance or the importance or the value of the reader in the meaning making of the text. Now, as we move on further from here, what we have understood till now is that the author creates some sort of navigational tool, that is a sort of map in their text, and the reader, coming from a particular background or a particular mindset or a particular emotional setup, brings that element into the text while analyzing, reading, or making meaning of the text, and thereby enriching the text in that process. So that enrichment which the text has got becomes the subject of analysis, becomes the subject of concern and interest for a reader response theory. Moreover, what we realize from here is that when the reader is interacting with the text, it is not only adding meaning to it, but it is also engaging with it in a temporal manner. Now, what do I mean by engaging with it in a temporal manner? Earlier, it was understood that literature exists in space. That is, it occupies a space, and that space is engaged with the reader. Now, every reader reading the text in different spaces, places, and different times, the same reader having read the text at different point of times in their lives, also adds value or also adds various or multiple meaning to the text. So what we are trying to understand is that meaning making is not only spatial, but it is also temporal. With time too, the meaning that is communicated from the text or within the text, or rather, I'm sorry, not the meaning which is communicated from the text, or the meaning which the reader is actively deriving from the text also changes. Now, this whole concept of bringing the reader to the forefront has its basis on a theory which existed before the reader response theory really concretized into what it is now, and before the theorists really made it into what it is right now. So what was a theory that existed before that? So what I'm referring to is the theory of phenomenology as explained or as expounded by a well-known critic, Wolfgang Iser. What does Iser have to say about phenomenology, or what does the concept of phenomenology mean, or what is phenomenology firstly, and secondly, how does phenomenology lend itself to the concept of reader response theory? Now, phenomenology comes from the word phenomenon. What is phenomenon? Phenomenon is an observed physical reality, right? And something which is perceivable, something which is understood. And opposite to phenomenon would be noumenon. Noumenon would mean something which exists but which is not in the perception of the human beings. So, which means there could be a far off planet somewhere far away in some faraway galaxy, but if it is not in the human perception, it is of no value, it is of no use, it is just not there, it is not there in the consciousness. So its existence or its non-existence is immaterial to the human perception. The moment it comes within the perception of a person or within a reader, and the moment they perceive it according to their own understanding, it starts having value, significance, or meaning in the life of the person who has perceived it. So the perception of something is called a phenomenon, and from there comes that philosophical idea of phenomenology. So what we are trying to, or how do we relate this to the concept of reader response theory? Now, according to the reader response theory, a text has no meaning unless the reader has engaged with the text, or has perceived the text, or has meaningfully made some interaction or relationship with the text. So unless the reader starts existing, the text itself does not have any meaning. So therefore, the added value that the reader response criticism brings to the theory of analysis is that the reader becomes the empowered person in the process of the meaning making of the text, or rather, to put it differently, the reader becomes more prominent or more important than the other aspects that exist while understanding a text, its value, its meaning, or its relevance and importance. With that, I end the lecture today, and the next lecture we would take up the name of the theorists, and we would try to now put them more concretely into a proper background to understand the various nuances and the more relevant and important part of the reader response theory. Thank you.